So we are looking at biblical considerations for immigration. And let's just see, in the past we've seen that we're commanded to love immigrants because they're human beings made in the image of God. We're to love everybody. So surely love. But that commandment is specifically to Israel, saying the stranger that is in your midst, you are to love them. So the immigrant. Order is necessary. It's how God works out of order, and we should work out of order. Any policy we have should have an orderliness about it. It shouldn't just be haphazard. The Bible teaches property rights. A lot of times you hear people say things like, well, nobody should own the land. Things should just belong to everyone. That, and they'll use the Bible to justify it. You can't use the Bible to justify it. What they are espousing is communism. And they are trying to use our love and maybe gullibility to hoist communism on us. And this is a teaching that the church has not taught well, that the Bible does teach property rights. If it's yours, it's yours. And then you're going to answer to God how you use it, of course, but it is yours. And that's how things are. God establishes boundaries. This is how God operates. All through the Bible, borders, nations, walls. And we're told today that borders, nations, and walls are evil. But yet God is the one that institutes borders, nations, and walls. So what are they saying? That what God has done is evil. And if you think about it, it is, again, an effort to cause us to let go of our biblical ideas so a globalist utopia can accomplish what they want to accomplish. Because with no borders, walls, or nations, then you have the perfect setup for the kingdom of Antichrist, which will eventually happen, but hopefully not on my watch. Wisdom dictates the recognition of evil we looked at last week. We live in a world of evil. We have to recognize that there's evil out there. And in all of our policies, even regarding immigration, we have to look and recognize that people live by values. So what are people's values? And will their values jive with our values or conflict with our values? Are their values evil or are their values righteous? Those are questions that have to be answered. And we said last week, you're not going to let someone just walk through your front door and come in and bring values into your home that are evil. And you shouldn't do that at a national level either. And when people break the law, the government must act. That is the government's job, is to act and to keep people from breaking law, to be a terror against the
lawbreakers.
Evil. Yeah. And to reward that which is good. Yeah, those are the words right there from Romans 13. So now we come to stewardship. It has to be factored in. Stewardship has to be factored in. In my opinion, at least in my study of looking at immigration, I think stewardship has to be factored in. It is a widespread biblical principle. All over the Bible it talks about stewardship. For instance, at the very beginning, you notice in Genesis 2:15, has sin entered into the world yet? No. We're in a perfect world, in the garden, a place called Paradise, Eden. And Adam and Eve were perfect people. Imagine that. And they were told to till and to keep the garden. There was work to be done. They were stewards of what God had given them. God had created the world and had given them that garden and said, now your job is to keep it and to till it. Now, they didn't have thorns and thistles growing in there, but evidently there were things that they had to do to enhance the production of what was there. Maybe they had to hoe around it some. I don't know. Maybe they need to water. There was a mist that went up to water, but then we needed to prune some. I don't know. But they were doing things, whatever it was. They were working to keep and to till. So they were stewards of what God had given them, even in a perfect world. How much more in a fallen world should we thrive to embrace the stewardship that God has given us? Because now the world is fallen and things tend to decay and deterioration and evil lurks. So even more so now, we should be good stewards. Proverbs is full of stewardship things. There's just all kinds of verses. And of course, now that I've got that up there, I'm not thinking of any. But there's just all kinds of verses all through Proverbs that talk about how that we should be good stewards. One of them is that the borrower is servant to the lender. Borrower is servant to the lender. In other words, we are servants or good stewards of God, right? But when we borrow, there's someone else that enters into the picture too. Not only are we answering to God, but now we're answering to the person, the borrower, the creditor, the lender. Yeah. So we're answering to them too. So we have responsibility to God, but if you allow a creditor in your life, then you have responsibilities to them too. Now, I know Americans today don't act like they do. Sometimes they just walk away from things and like, well, phooey on you, just leave you holding the bag. But as Christians, we strive to not ever go there. We strive to not go there because we know that we are stewards. And then Jesus taught a lot about stewardship. In a parable in Matthew 25, and I'm preparing a sermon right now for Matthew 25, probably in September, October, November, somewhere through there. We'll get to that and start looking at this Matthew 25. To one was given 5 talents, another 2 talents, another 1 talent, and every one of them gave an account to the Lord because they were stewards of His money. And then in Luke 12, there was the man who built a barn, and he thought that it belonged to him, right? And God said, "Thou fool, this night all these things will be required. Your soul is required of thee. Then who shall these things be?" Because who were they all alone? They were God's. It's the man who built the big barns, and he had a lot, and he thought that, well, my hand has done this. I'm the one that's gotten all this. And all of us here, we come in pretty humble into this world, and we leave pretty humble in this world. So we need to realize that everything we have in between comes from the Lord. How about Luke 16? You've got the rich man and Lazarus there, and other scriptures there that talk about stewardship. There was the unjust steward there that his boss required him to, or someone that he had borrowed money from, required him to repay the money. So he went out and started finding people who owed him money and started getting the money from them. Okay, and we're not going to go into all, but that's the parable there in Luke 16. Luke 19 has a parable that's just very similar to the one in Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is 5 talents, 2 talents, 1, and then you have up to 10 talents or pounds in Luke 19, and the little phrase, "Occupy till I come." All of this is stewardship principles. And Jesus taught that we are stewards and that someday we'll give an account for all that we have. Paul's writings, 1 Corinthians 4, moreover, it is required that a steward be found faithful. And 2 Thessalonians 3 says, if a man doesn't work, neither should he eat. 1 Timothy 5 talks about widows, and who do you bring in as a widow? If you're going to take care of, if the church is going to take care of a widow, you have to define what a widow is, because we know today that he who defines things controls the whole debate, right? And so that's why everything's being redefined. Titus 1, all of these are passages that in Paul's writings that bring up stewardship principles. We are stewards of the physical world, the creation, our land, our home. When Renee and I built our home in 1992, we prayed over our home. And we said before we ever even built our home, we prayed several times. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was several times. We prayed and said, God, we want to use our home for your glory. And oh my goodness, we had people at our house all the time. It was just like people coming and going, and people on Sunday afternoons. It was the gathering place for preachers. And we would have friends that would be over. And then we started having kids. And we kind of turned a corner there. And it was like the focus was on the kids and teaching them values. You got to have a place to teach them values. You can't just take them, send them out in the world and them get values. They've got to have some time at home with parents, for goodness sakes. At home with parents. Maybe not all the time, but there's got to be a lot more than what our culture is doing. So we wanted our home to be used for the glory of God. Our land is pretty worthless. I don't know how it's being used for the glory of God, but I try to bush hog it and keep the thistles down. Ragweed, and right now the not yellow puccoon, yellow goldenrod. Thank you. Yeah, and all that Johnson grass. I'm out there all the time mowing it, trying to kill it. Results of a fallen world, but I feel like I'm a steward of some physical things, and then we are stewards of monetary resources, financial things. If God has given us money, we are to use that money in a way that brings glory to Him. Okay? Now, some people, some well-meaning Christian would say, well, the very moment that you get money, you should just give it away. All right then and there. Well, that's well-intentioned, it's well-meaning, but I think it's taking the words of Jesus out of its context. And it's certainly overlooking some injunctions that Paul gave to the young man named Timothy. We have monetary resources, and we are to be stewards of those monetary resources. Not that we're supposed to just give them all away immediately. We're supposed to take them and use them for His glory. There are spiritual resources that we are stewards of. The brethren, the church. Some people couldn't care any less about the church than what they currently care. And that is so sad. Because the greatest force that America has is her churches. And yet since 2020, people were just so content to just go home and vacate the churches. And you know, it took years for some people to get back to church. 5 years later, and some people 5.5 years later, and some people still are sitting at home. And they're watching their preacher on the TV. And they say, I'm doing my church. No, you're not doing your church. You're watching the preacher on TV. I'm glad for you, but you need a church. Okay? So we are stewards, and I'm trying to be a steward of the church by pointing that out, that if we don't have churches, we're cooked. And we need strong churches. And you need to think about everything you can do to make your church stronger. Think about that. What can you do to make your church stronger? Because we want a strong church to be here for all of these kids. We got a lot of young people sitting here today. And we want this church strong for them down the road. And so think and pray about that. What can I do to make my church stronger? Stewardship. All of these principles raise difficult questions. So guys, of the things that I'm going to preach on immigration, I'm going to say this with a smile today because I feel really happy about I'm going to get this off of my shoulders today. Okay. And then I'm going to walk on and just let God take care of it. Of all the things I'm going to preach about stewardship, this is the most hair-raising, the stewardship one. This is the one that if people are going to have different ideas, everyone's not going to agree on all the details of everything I'm going to say. And people have to pray, and they have to think about their own situation and ponder the principles. That's what our goal is to ponder some principles here, that we are stewards. You will answer for your home, how you steward your home and the things that you have. But our leaders will also answer to God for how they have stewarded the country. because it all belongs to God. And God gave you your home, and He gave the leaders the country into their hands for a little while for their care, right? So there are principles that we need to ponder. And when we don't agree on the details, we need to talk about them instead of throwing a fit and protesting and throwing monkey wrenches in things. That's not what godly people do. It's not what rational people do. So, we're commanded to give. Now, a lot of times people in this commanded to give, they will say, well, even Abraham, he blessed the whole world. He was a blessing to everybody. You know, the Bible says that right there in Genesis 12, that he would be a blessing to everyone. But what people don't know about Abraham is that when Abraham was a blessing to everyone, did that mean that he sent money to people all over the world? No. Does that mean that he allowed people from all over the world to come to Hebron where he was living and set up camp there? No. What it means biblically is, it has nothing to do with the money. It has to do with the Messiah and the Word. It has to do with some values that Abraham believed, and he taught his children and his grandchildren, and it led to the Messiah, and it led to the production of the Bible, which is the greatest document the world has ever seen, because it is the words of God. So when Abraham blessed the world, it was not with monetary means. It was spiritual things that he was a conduit for that blessing for. Well, the United States has blessed the world too, though. We have blessed the world. Have we blessed the world with money? We have, yes. But how about this? How about the gospel? There was a time when the United States wasn't so concerned about sending money all over the world. They were concerned about sending the gospel all over the world. Maybe that's what we need to focus more on, is sending the gospel. Because the gospel gives freedom to people. With the gospel, people learn good citizenship principles when they read their Bible. And if they have a pastor that teachers in the church that try to teach the Word of God, they're going to find all kinds of good citizenship principles. And how about a productive worker? Will that buoy a nation up when you have productive workers? Yeah, economies are based on productivity. If you don't have that's why we have GDP and all kinds of productivity numbers that come out once a quarter and annually, and everybody's concerned. But we have whole TV stations, channels that just focus on those financials because they're important to a country. But that productive worker comes from the gospel. It's kind of hard to find productive workers these days, right? Yep. Maybe we have a gospel deficiency in this land that once sent missionaries elsewhere. Hopefully some of them will start sending some of those missionaries back here to help us, because we're in trouble. So the greater blessing, we've said this before, it's an old adage, your greater blessing if you give a person a fish or if you teach them to fish. Well, if you give them a fish, guess what you're going to have to do every day? Give them another fish. But if you teach them to fish, how much time will you have to create the same result? Maybe one day when you teach them to fish, right? Let's just take everybody within 10 miles of right here, or 10 miles of where you live. Can you imagine if you are going to use your resources, both physical and spiritual, to help people within a 10-mile radius around you? Well, one way to do that is that you're going to go fishing every day. And Daniel's going to love this the first day or two. But there's a lot of people within 10 miles of you, Daniel. So when you go out and you're getting a fish for everybody within 10 miles of you, it's going to take you all day. And then you're going to try to get it to them. And you're just going to be exhausted. And in fact, you might not even be able to accomplish it. Might not be able to catch enough fish in one day for everybody. In fact, I don't think you can. Not even you, the master fisherman that you are. So just a 10-mile radius, if you're going to provide and be a good Christian and help people, What is your best approach? To give a fish to everybody every day for the rest of your life? Or just go out and start investing in people, time with different people, teaching them how to fish and multiplying that good? Yeah. That's stewardship. That's good stewardship. But somehow or another we have been taught and we have bought into the idea that as Christians we should just give a fish every day to everybody. Okay, let's move on. Matthew 10:42, we're commanded to give. Here's what command to give. It says, whosoever shall give you a drink unto one of these little ones, a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. So we want to be good stewards and we want to help. But the question is, how do we help? How do we find a way to do this? And we need to do it. There's the command right there. And especially these little ones. There's a lot of little ones. Little ones are people who cannot help themselves. Notice it didn't say big ones. It's these little ones. People who cannot help themselves. They need you to give them a cup of cold water. Give them a cup of cold water in the name of Jesus. It does my heart good. Whenever my grandkids come over and they want some milk and they say, Grandpa, can I get some milk? And I'll go get a glass and get them some milk. It does my heart good to give them a glass of milk. Doesn't it do your heart good to help someone? Now, if they're still sitting at if my son comes in and says, Dad, get me a glass of water or give me a glass of milk, oh, I might do it a time or two. But if he does it every day, at some point I'm going to say, get it yourself, you lazy bum. Right? Okay, so we are commanded to help the poor, the fatherless, the widows. There's hundreds of verses in the Bible like that. The poor, the fatherless, the widows, those are the ones that come up. Notice it doesn't say the rich, those with fathers and can provide for them, and the people who are married. And, that family unit is very important for provision. And when the father was gone in the Bible, you had fatherless people, you had widows, and you had poor people. Okay? So the question then becomes, in my mind, as I was thinking through this, I was thinking, does God intend for us to help every poor person in the world? There's a lot of poor people in the world. Or does He intend us to help poor people who are near us? As in Bible times, like, here's a guy right here, right nearby, that needs some help, to help them out. Okay? Or does God really expect me to start writing checks for every poor person in Ukraine and every poor person in Afghanistan and every poor person in Bangladesh? Am I responsible for every poor person in the world? Well, we can't be. Nobody can be. But we all have poor people near us, and we certainly can help those poor people. There is no ability to do such a thing of helping people all over the world, every poor person in the world. At least not by giving them a fish, right? Or by cutting them a check. And then there's James 2:15, where James is talking about if a brother or sister is naked or destitute and you see them in that situation, he says, what kind of faith is it if you go to them and you tell them, be thou warmed, be thou clothed, and you don't actually do something to help them? But here's what people a lot of times don't see. The context there is a brother or sister. It's talking about people in the church. James is talking about people in the church that we're responsible to help each other. He's not saying in that you're supposed to help everybody in the whole world. Now, by the way, should we have a heart to want to help as many people as possible? Yeah, we want to have that heart. But the command is to take care of the brother or sister right here in the church. And a lot of times context is overlooked. A lot of times verses are just pulled right out of context and they're dangled out there as well. See here, this is what you're supposed to do. Now help people all over the world, brother or sister, those that are near us. 1 Timothy 5, verses 3 to 16, Paul gave specific qualifiers for which widows to help. He says in verse 3, honor widows that are widows indeed. Now, what does it mean to be a widow indeed? Indeed means that it's a true widow, a real widow. But through these verses 3 through 16, just for instance, he goes, that's verse 3, he goes down and says in verse 4, but if a widow has children or nephews, let them take care of them. It actually says, let them learn first to show piety at home. Show piety at home. In other words, it begins in the home. Now, what is it in our world today? Are people in families taking care of each other? No, we're actually destroying families. We're actually busting families up. We got a no-fault divorce, an easy divorce system. We've got a system where we don't encourage families to stay together and pull together, which is the safety net. This is why there's a lot of problems in black communities, because the fathers are missing in, what is it, like 78% of the homes? I mean, it's way up there. It's way high. So the home is important in the eyes of God. And that's what's left out. So anyway, it goes on and says that she has to trust in God. In other words, a widow indeed, for the church's purpose that we're supposed to help, is to be someone that's trusting in God. And then how about this? If any provide not for his own, especially those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. And then it goes on and says, let her not be taken into widowhood if she's less than 60 years old. I wonder why that was there, less than 60 years old. She could remarry.
But could she? Because the Jewish law said that they couldn't.
Well, even if she couldn't, let's just say she couldn't remarry without getting into that quagmire, because those things do happen. Without doing that, could she take care of herself if she's under 60? Under 60. Yeah. Most people under 60 can take care. I know we have people today who think that they can't because I hurt my back and the mines. I can't do anything now. You could sit at a computer desk and do some work there. You sit and watch television, so you can sit and do work at a computer desk. Oh, that I know. But I'm telling you the truth. I'm just telling you the truth. Okay? In Bible times, if she was under 60 years old, both of these that were said here today are things that people did. They did hard things. You either go out and you find someone else to marry so you can be taken care of, or you get out there and you start taking care of yourself. One of the two. And then there's a lot of other things. They can't wander about from house to house learning to be idle. You know, people that sit around with nothing to do and they're idle, their minds imagine all kinds of terrible things to do, and they end up drama queens and kings. That's what they become. Okay, so without preaching that, let's move on. The whole point here is that stewardship principles require parameters. You don't just take care of everybody. There are parameters for who you take care of. And again, today we just want it just for anybody. Just take care of anybody and everybody. How many can we help is a question of economics. Economics is the study of unlimited desires. And I used to tell my students this in high school, that if we just took some time here and just started writing on the board all the things you want, we'd be here all hour, we'd be here all day, we'd be here tomorrow, the next day, as long as you're alive, we'd still be writing. Because we have unlimited desires. As soon as we get one thing, guess what? We want something else. And as soon as we get that, we want. But then here's the problem. We live in a world with limited resources. Nobody can have everything. Nobody. So the economics is a study of how do you bring these two things together. Your unlimited desires with what God has provided, which is limited resources. And I say God has provided. By the way, why do you have unlimited desires? Who inculcated that in you? The devil. And who made the world where there's limited resources? Who made the world? God made a world of limited. Now, isn't that interesting that God would look at us when we have all these unlimited desires and still allow us to live in a world of limited resources? It sounds to me like the study of economics should be undergirded by biblical principles, because it sounds to me like God is the one that set this thing up. Well, as Ecclesiastes says, to try the souls of men, to try the hearts. The world is in our hearts, and yet we can't get it all. So money is not unlimited. That's something we have to remember. Is there anybody who thinks that money is unlimited? No. Not unless you crank it out in the printing press. Okay? Money is not unlimited. There's old saying, money does not grow on trees. Doesn't grow on trees. So, is money limited? Yes. Is your money limited? Yes. But somehow or another people think that the government's money isn't. Right? Your money's limited, but the government's money isn't? Doesn't the government take money from us in the form of taxes? So it is our money that was limited to begin with, and now is with the government. And it's even probably more limited there because it was limited before they took it from us, and they're taking people's limited money and trying to pull it together. And it's certainly limited there because 30 years ago, for every dollar that you sent to Washington, only 25 cents of it was actually used for its intended purpose. Where did the 75 cents go to? Administration. Government bureaucracy. Government is the most inefficient organization in the world. I can guarantee you that if you decide that you're going to give $1 to someone, they're going to get $1. But if the government gives them $1, they're going to get 25 cents of it by the time it goes through the system and gets to them. Money does not grow on trees. Well, no, wait a minute. Let me just point out. It does not grow on trees, but let's just say it did. If money grew on trees, guess what? Money would still be limited because you only have so many trees and room for trees. Even if you could grow it on trees, it would still be limited. All right, so money comes from productivity. From productivity. And is productivity limited? Is there only a certain amount of work you can do? Yeah. So, if you crank it out with the printing presses, as our government has been doing the last few years, then there is nothing to back that money up. And is the money worth anything? No. Your money becomes worthless. Your money means nothing. You have to have something to back that money up. Now, before the 1970s, what backed up our money? Gold. The only thing that's backing it up right now is productivity. And even that productivity is limited. And the only reason we have the big boon, in my opinion, in our lifetime is because technology has advanced productivity. But at some point, there is a limit to that productivity. You have to have work behind everything. Every dollar, or that dollar, is worthless. Now, if it'd still be limited if it grew on trees. This requires wise decisions in the allocation of our resources. We have to be wise. You know that with your checkbook. But somehow or another, we think that those principles don't work when it comes to the government pocket, or someone else's pocket. Now, is that a very nice thing? To look at your neighbor that way and say, I'm going to be a good steward of what I have, but I'm going to take what you have. It's not a very nice thing. It's a very godly thing. Not at all. I want these principles everywhere because I know they're biblical principles and I know they work. To think that the U.S. worker can feed, clothe, and shelter the whole world is the best way to make everyone poor. Because that goes right back to Daniel a while ago and the fishing. If he's providing fish for everybody within 10 miles of him, before long Daniel is going to be one tired pup. And everybody's going to be hungry the next day. Right? Mishandled resources will diminish a country or destroy a country. So a country has to decide how they're going to use their resources, just like you do. By the way, I believe that any ministry that helps poor people should also teach poor people. It should teach them biblical principles of stewardship. It should teach them how to use money. It should teach them how to make wiser decisions. And just to hand someone a can of beans and say, go on your way, we're not helping the person. We're not helping them at all. Because we're not addressing the root problem. The root problem is poor decisions. A lot of times that's spiritual. Poor decisions from bad choices. So we want to handle things in a way that shows great wisdom. Now I was thinking about this. The Amalekites in the Bible. Remember how the Amalekites would come across the Jordan River there and they would try to destroy the Jewish people. And the Jewish people were constantly having problems with the Amalekites. It just came to me, there's two things they could do. What do we always look at them doing? Plundering resources, coming over to take it. Just coming over and robbing from the Jewish people. Having a war, riding through with horses, taking their stuff, and destroying everything left behind. There was another thing they could have done. Those Amalekites weren't smart enough to figure it out. But I'm wondering if there's Amalekites today that have figured it out. And that second option is to convince the Jewish people to just give it all away. Because this is what you're supposed to do. This is the Christian thing to do. This is what God wants you to do. It's just give everything away. We have to guard against socialism, which is taking. Now, there's for my whole lifetime, you could preach against socialism, but here before long, it's not going to be very long, there's going to be people that's going to start hollering, politics, you're getting into politics. Well, it never was politics in the past, but it's becoming socialism where you take from one group to give to another group. The government does, by conscription or force, is becoming so common now that people are probably going to be able to say that. We need to guard against socialism. Socialism is not biblical. It is not biblical at all. Someone says, Acts 6, they sold all that they had and shared. And that's the point. They did it from their hearts. The government wasn't taking it from the Christians. The Christians were doing it from their hearts. And should we, from our hearts, help people? Yes, what God lays on our hearts, we should do. And then we'll answer to God for what we've done. So we have to maintain charity, which is wise giving, because we're stewards, right? And another thing, socialism is government, but Christian giving is individual. You decide from your heart to do it. If someone is taking money from you to give to someone else, don't give me this baloney of, I pay my taxes, and so I help people. No, what you did is you paid your taxes. That's all you did is you paid your taxes. If you want to help people, then reach into your pocket and help people. And be wise in how you do it. Charity begins at home. We've heard that one, right? Well, how about this? 1 Timothy 5:8. If any provide not for his own, not some other person's family, but his own. Remember we read that a while ago. That a widow could not be taken into the number of a widow if she had a child or a nephew that could take care of her. Okay? So that's providing for your own. And especially those of his own house. That's the closest of ties. We should be very concerned about our own homes and families. He hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. So stewardship begins, charity begins at home. Nationally, do we have homeless citizens? Do we have veterans that don't have places to stay? Yeah, it's pretty sad. Okay, so my point there was if we've got people here at home that needs to be taken care of, maybe nationally we need to begin to start taking care of our own people. And then after that, there's a basis maybe to reach out. But we're not even being biblical if we're not taking care of that which is closest to us, because that's a biblical concept. National challenges. Here's where it gets really murky, muddy water. And I'm just going to wade into it. California taxpayers alone annually spend almost $10 billion on one thing, health care, for one state, California, for one group of people, illegal immigrants. That is not health care for all Californians. That is health care just for the illegals. $10 billion, not million, but $1 billion. So if you calculate that out with California's population, it comes out to around $400 a year that every person that is a citizen in California has to pay every year just to take care of health care just for the illegals. And my point is, I'm wondering, is that sustainable stewardship? I guess that's what I'm asking. If it is, maybe we should continue. But if it's not, maybe we should be thinking about some things. Right now, we just passed $37 trillion in debt nationally, and analysts warn of a catastrophic debt spiral because you got to have gold or productivity backing all of those dollars, those new dollars that's being printed. Otherwise, the dollars don't mean anything. Only thing they do is just inflate, cause inflation. So a catastrophic debt spiral basically means that we become a third world nation. It's kind of like Bangladesh, you know. And we're being warned about this. We're being warned about this. Currently, and this is just some research I did, 160 million workers in the United States right now, and we have a population of 330 million people. So that means that there's one worker that feeds, clothes, shelters, and entertains 2 people in the United States. Every worker in the United States feeds, clothes, shelters, entertains, provides for all the needs for 2 people. And the question is, can 160 million workers provide for 8 billion people that's in the world? You'd be taking care of 50 people instead of 2 or 1 other besides yourself. A country impoverished would be no good to anyone. Has anyone stopped to think about that? Does everyone in the world get a free pass at the border in the United States? Can they just show up and just say, I just want to cross into the United States? That question has to be answered. It has to be answered. And people have to think about it. And they got to think about it in a way that is not political. God help us, and I literally mean that. Because we have news medias that are making it all political. And I'm trying not to be political. I don't want to be political. But we have to think about these things. We have to consider them. Other questions must be answered. Will immigrants work or need welfare when they get here? Well, I looked that up. And I got a statistic here in a minute on that. But this one here, will they be a burden on schools and health care? So I asked Renee this morning on the way to church, I said, "Hon, do you know how many people are in the United States that are not citizens, that live here that are not citizens?" And she told me what she thought. Probably 1 million people. Well, how about 55 million people? Out of 330 million people in the United States, 55 million are not citizens of the United States. In California, New York, and New Jersey, 1/4 of the populations of those states are not citizens. And those states are allowing a lot of them to vote too, which means that they make decisions on how the resources are allocated. Which means before long, the citizens of those and the workers, the stewards of those states will not be able to even make decisions about how the resources are allocated. Other people will be making those decisions if they're not already doing it, because here in Illinois, we typically have about a 6% participation rate on voting anyway. So 25% of the population could show up and outvote the 6% very easily, because we don't care enough to even go vote. In 2022, here's the major welfare use rates. This is what I looked up on that. Will immigrants work or need welfare? Citizens use welfare at a 39% rate. U.S. citizens, 39%, but immigrants, 59% of them use welfare, which means that our resources are heavily engaged. It's about double for immigrants, for non-citizens, than it is for the citizens of the country. Now, should we do that? I'm not answering that question. I'm just saying we need to think. If we're going to be wise stewards, we have to think about, are these things sustainable? Logically, everyone can't come to the United States. So who? In the Bible, who do we provide for? In the Bible, leaders prioritize the people God placed under their leadership over the people who were not under their leadership. That's why we've already seen verses that talk about if you're worse than an infidel if you don't provide for those of your own household, because you are responsible for your own household, right? Kings in Israel took care of Israel. They were responsible for Israel. They were not responsible for surrounding nations outside of occasional aid, charity, which is a good thing. Occasional aid, charity. 1 Timothy 5:8, if a dad cares for other kids in a way that harms his own, because remember, he that provides not for his own is worse than an infidel. So if a dad cares for other kids in a way that harms his own, and by the way, this is why we have PKs, preachers' kids, because a lot of preachers have taken care of everyone else's kids and didn't take care of their own, and they raised a PK. Okay? So if dad cares for other kids in a way that harms his own, what would we say about him as a dad? Yeah, David's saying this. Negatory. Negatory. Bad father. If leaders care for other citizens in a way that harms their own citizens, that does not make them merciful leaders. It doesn't. It does make them bad leaders. But somehow or another, we in our minds think, oh, this makes them godly, Christian, merciful, because they're taking care of others. No, if you do it in a way that harms your own, you're a bad leader. To truly help, we must be wise in allocating resources. That's the point. I'm not saying that a nation shouldn't do any of these things. I'm just saying we've got to think things through. Somehow or another, we just think money grows on trees. It goes to Springfield or Washington. There will be money there to do all of this stuff. The whole debate point is wisdom with the resources. How do you use your resources wisely? Wise giving considers two things. First is the development of the needy. Ephesians 4:28 says, let him that stole steal no more, rather laboring with his hands that he may have to give to him that has not. Okay? In other words, when we get saved, we work so we can take care of our own and be helpful, right? But, and that, by the way, that's a pay-forward thing. That's a pay-forward thing. I grew up poor, and I'm thankful. I remember growing up poor, and I remember situations where I was ashamed. of certain things. It's like, I'm not taking those food stamps in and using those food stamps. Just ashamed to do it. And when I grew up and I got my first job, I was extremely thankful that I could provide for my family. And I was extremely indignant when people came to us and said, when I was a professional with a career, making a ton of money compared to what I grew up on. I was indignant when people came to me and said, well, your kids, they could get WIC. You could get all kinds of orange juice and milk and cereal. And I'm thinking, man, that's all the stuff that we eat. It'd be nice. I wanted to pay forward. I was working, and I was glad to be a taxpayer to a certain degree to help out others. But then you have 2 Thessalonians 3 says, if a man doesn't work, neither should he eat, which means that he should have enough gumption to want to work. If he doesn't, he's got a spiritual problem, and you don't feed his spiritual problem. That's like giving dollars to a drunk person. My uncles used to come and they'd ask for money. And first I'd give them some money, and then I realized they're just using it to buy alcohol and drugs. Why should I give them money? And I quit. Well, actually, I didn't want to the first time because I knew what they were doing. But I finally got enough gumption to say, no, I'm not doing that. So you need two things. You need to develop the people that have the need. That's kind of like teaching them to fish, right? And then you need the ability of the giver. The ability of the giver, and this is something, again, people are going to have different ideas on this. Some people are going to take the idea of, well, if $1 in needs to be $1 out. God gives you $1, you need to just get rid of that $1 because God gave it to you, and what you're supposed to do is share it. And then there's other people that's going to say, but no, wait a minute. There's a lot of parables in the Bible that talks about that God gave you this, and you're supposed to take it and use it to multiply it. How can you multiply something that you don't have? So you got to retain enough that you can still multiply what you've got, right? That's how investment works. You don't make a return on zero, no matter what you do. So, stewardship principles have to be applied in government as well as in the family. Our children have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, or they'll never learn important life lessons, and the same thing is true of a country. Our workers, our citizens, they're all spoiled children in America. And we've got to get our spoiled children of America back to, they need someone to be a little rough and say, look, here's some facts of life right here. You got to do hard things. So here's my question. We're getting close to the end. Do we need to stand up again for just a minute or not?
Nope.
Are we good?
We're good.
How many still with me? Raise your hand. Okay. Should billions come here? By the way, I think everybody would agree that we want some to come here. You know, I don't think anybody's totally against immigration. Okay? But can billions come here? Well, we know that they can't, that we don't have the stewardship principles for that to happen, right? Should they come here, or should they realize the principles that have impoverished them and choose better? Just like a kid that you're raising, and you're giving them money and giving them money and giving them money, and they're taking it and they're buying drugs, they're buying alcohol, they're going places, you spend the money for bad, and then at some point you realize, hey, this kid needs to be trained how to use the money. They need some hard lessons. And that's what good parents do, right? So that's what good principles, how they're applied to the nation too. So, why is it that people are starving to death in a lot of countries? Well, a lot of it, every now and then, it's because there's a famine somewhere, okay? And they can't help that. But most of it, why is it that in my lifetime Bangladesh has always been Bangladesh? Because there are principles that are bad and good principles that have not been used. So either way this thing goes, the latter is going to have to be done. At some point, the people in other countries are going to have to make a better choice. So we can let them come here and impoverish us, and then we're all saying, look, we got to make better choices, or we can teach them where they are to just make better choices. Because what's the problem? Choices. Make better choices. And again, you have a famine, we'll help you out. We're going to send aid. That's what we do. Amen? We would all be on board for that. So it's a location problem or a stewardship problem. Well, we're always told that it is the former, a location problem. They got problems over there, so if they come over here, their life will be better. But is it a location problem? It's a stewardship problem. They need to learn biblical principles, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. What has worked in the United States is what it's done for decades, which is teach other countries the biblical principles that will elevate them. Teach them wise usage of their own resources in their own country. That's the problem, is they don't understand. This is wisdom, and it creates far fewer problems, and it addresses the real problem. And the real problem is a what problem? Not a location problem, but a stewardship problem. And are we all going to agree on all this stuff I've been preaching today about stewardship? Probably not on all the details. But are we getting the general idea that we need biblical stewardship principles? We are called to take the gospel to them and to teach biblical principles, because it says when we go there, go ye into all the world and make disciples. What does make disciples mean? Teach them biblical principles. And will these biblical principles elevate them in other countries too? These are principles that end poverty and bring God's blessings. Now here they are. We said a while ago, what are the blessings that these biblical principles bring? They will end some things. They end wars. Isn't that a good thing? Do we like war? No. We're not going to fight a war unless we have to. Once we have a politician that's close to the industrial military complexes wanting to make a bunch of money, and they induce us to get... Anyway, we're usually not going to fight wars. We don't want to get entangled in wars, right? Christian principles will end... How about ethnic conflicts? Ethnic conflicts. This is the problem. This is the problem in Ukraine right now. You've got Ukrainians and you've got Russians, and they're two different ethnic groups that are trying to occupy the same area. By the way, that's called diversity, isn't it? Diversity. Two different ethnic groups trying to occupy the same. And what are we always told about diversity? That it is our strength. And what is it doing to Ukraine? It's destroying it. Ethnic conflict. Stewardship principles from the Bible in persecution. These principles from the Bible will end the corruption and the power structures of gangs and cartels, because in some countries that's what they have. They have cartels that control everything and gangs that control everything. Do we want that here in the United States? No. And that's why we should vote for even our local authorities that's going to go after every person selling drugs in Saline County, Williamson County, right? If we just look for a D or an R, may God judge us. If we will look for people that's going to enforce Christian principles and get rid of drugs off of our streets, then God's going to be pleased. And these Christian principles, they don't just end things, but they encourage some things. The Bible encourages thrift, which means good stewardship, taking care of what you have. You know, we taught our children to be thrifty. And there were times that I looked at some of them and I thought, well, I just don't know if you're going to be thrifty or not. You know, you're spending like a drunken sailor. And guess what? They come back to being thrifty. Oh, there were some that were thrifty to begin with, and those usually are called misers, you know. people who don't like thriftiness will find a label to put on someone that's being thrifty. That's not a very nice label, right? But thrift is a good thing. It's good stewardship. Hard work and investment. That's what the Bible teaches us. Free speech and religious liberty. Doesn't that end a lot of those conflicts up there when you give free speech and liberty? But if you just have everybody putting labels and arguing, that's not going to help. But free speech where there's a flow of ideas and people are actually listening to each other and trying to make a wise decision, is that a good thing? Yeah, but somehow or another, that's being taken from us in the U.S. and we're told, no. We can't, if you say certain things, you can't say that. If you have certain positions, you can't have that. It's to discuss it with people. We need free speech because the truth, you don't have to worry about truth when you have free speech. It'll always rise. Democracy, where we have a voice in how we are ruled. So this approach multiplies resources for charity. It's putting to work the investment principles of Jesus' parables. And it's also the work of the church in the hearts. Because when we are teaching other countries biblical principles, we are teaching them the principles that Jesus has taught. And we're also, as a church, working in the hearts of people. Because that's where the problem is. It's in the hearts. And that's why people that have certain ideas right now, if you watch the news very much at all, do you see people that get so upset that they just start screaming and they just have a meltdown? That's why this is happening. That's why it's happening, because people are doing everything off of emotions and they're not making decisions that's based on sound principles. And that's what the Bible gives us. And that's why cultures are sustained that follow biblical principles. I'm sorry, we're not on our next to the last one. We're expected to contribute or work. 1 Chronicles 22:2. David, let's get some scriptures from the Old Testament. David commanded to gather together the strangers. Who were the strangers? Immigrants that were in the land of Israel, and he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. So there were immigrants in Israel, and what did David make them do? Work. There was a work program. It wasn't a handout. They were contributing. They were contributing. And why? So you can live with dignity and purpose. See, that's what I did not feel as a child on government programs. Someone says, well, your psyche was damaged. No, it wasn't. My psyche functioned very well. I knew there had to be something better. And I'm very, very thankful for that program that helped my mom and I when we lived on $144 a month and made a $65 a month payment on the trailer that we had bought so we could have a place to live in. And I worked during the summer so I could put in the furnace so we could have heat, the water line so we could have water finally to our house. See, I'm not being a hypocrite about this stuff. I have lived it. And I am thankful for what God has given me. We can live with dignity and purpose. How about another scripture? 2 Chronicles 2:17. Solomon numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel after the numbering wherewith David his father had numbered them. They were found 153,600. 153,600 what? Immigrants, non-citizens in the land. It's wise for the government to know, isn't it? I just found out this week that we had 55 million in the United States. Did you know that we had 55 million non-citizens in the United States? Our government hasn't been telling us. Our media certainly hasn't been telling us. It's kind of nice to know that. Kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. And how about this next verse? He set 70,010 of them to be bearers of burdens, 80,000 to be hewers in the mountain, and 3,600 overseers to set the people to work. So We had 70,000 laborers, 80,000 timbermen. And I bet those 80,000 timbermen, when they shouted, "Timber!" did it in Hebrew. So that all the Hebrews around would know the tree's falling. Right? I think we should require English if you're going to come to the United States. 70,000 laborers, 80,000 timbermen, 3,600 overseers. If you add those three numbers up, what do you get? 153,000, which was the number from the previous verse. So what this tells us is, one verse tells us how many immigrants there were, and the next verse tells us that every one of them had a job. Something the U.S. doesn't require for able-bodied U.S. citizens, even. I'm talking able-bodied, because we use charity for those who are not able-bodied. Leviticus 25:35, if thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him, yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. This is the last. Do you see that little red thing in the lower right? Yeah. That means you can breathe. You see the end is in sight. A stranger or a sojourner, if he's fallen in decay, you relieve him. Is that charity? Yeah. So what's this saying? We're responsible once they're legally in. We're responsible once they're legally in. That's kind of like taking on a new son-in-law. We're going to let him in this family? Because once he's in this family, guess what? We're responsible. That's kind of like letting someone new in the church. We're going to think about it because once they're in, we are responsible. If they fall into decay, then we have deacons in the church to take care of the physical needs of people. And this is talking about for the country, though. That God says this. This is God speaking. He says, you're going to have strangers and sojourners who are going to come to Israel, and you're responsible once they're legally in. Thou shalt relieve him. That means responsible. The Samaritans in Luke 10:29, remember the parable of the Good Samaritan. Did the Good Samaritan, did he take responsibility for the person that was in the ditch near him? Yes, he did. Would you, if you saw someone laying in a ditch on your way home from church today, would you do something?
At least look at him.
Yeah, you don't want to just look at them, do you? You'd at least call the police, right? You'd do something. If this was 40 years ago, you'd do something personally. You'd just get out, right? You saw someone out there doing this, what'd you do? You stopped and gave them a ride. We don't even do that anymore. Our culture is so unbiblical now that you're scared. So people shouldn't die near us from the lack of help. Because it says, thou shalt relieve him, that's your help, that he may live with thee. That means they shouldn't die in your midst. That you're doing something to help people. So I guess the question is, how many people are we capable of helping? That's a stewardship question, right? And that's why I said at the very beginning, everybody's going to come down at a different place, right? Let's pray. Lord, lead us by your Spirit. We want to be good stewards of what you've given us. Help us in our family to make wise decisions, in our church to make wise decisions, and help our leaders, Lord, to make wise decisions. Help us to elect people that will make wise decisions. Help our hearts, Lord, to always be open to help people, but help us to always be mindful of stewardship principles and doing things in a way that we can continue to help people. And help us, Lord, to look far beyond just throwing a fish at someone. Help us, Lord, to teach principles to people that will help them. I pray, God, For our young people here today, that maybe they have gleaned some principles that will help them someday when they're married and they have their own families. Lord, they will remember back to some of these principles, and Lord, they will make wise decisions and not just be the typical American that spends every dollar they make as soon as it hits their pocket. Help us, Lord, to be led by your Spirit. Thank you, God, that we live in a country where we are as blessed as we are, and help us to be mindful to use some of our blessings to be a blessing to others. And help us to use all that we have for your glory in some way, God. Lead us by your Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.